The lie of New Year's resolutions. If you're anything like me, you've probably thought at some point that New Year's resolutions are kind of stupid. Not because change is stupid, not because ambition is stupid, but because most people approach change in the most ineffective way possible. They wait for a date on the calendar. They borrow motivation from the collective hype of January. They declare a version of themselves they've never been and then act shocked when that version collapses under pressure 2 weeks later. And when it fails, because it almost always does, they don't question the system, they question themselves. I'm just not disciplined. I lack consistency. I guess I'm not that type of person. But here's the truth no one wants to admit. Most people don't fail at changing their lives because they're weak. They fail because they're aiming at the wrong level of the problem. And until you understand what that level is, you can read every productivity book, watch every motivational video, set every habit tracker in the world, and still end up exactly where you started. I'm not saying this from a position of superiority. I've quit far more goals than I've ever completed. Probably 10 times more. And honestly, that's how it should be. Because if you're actually reaching beyond your current identity, most attempts should fail. But there's a difference between failing forward and repeating the same self-deception every year, and most people are stuck in the second category. So if you're here because you want to build something meaningful, transform your body, your mind, escape a life that feels small or constrained, or finally stop quitting on yourself, then this isn't going to be a quick hit of motivation. This is something deeper. This is about why you are the way you are, why your current strategies don't work, and what actually has to change before your behavior ever does. This is not content you consume and forget. This is content you sit with, pause, rewind, think about. Because real change doesn't begin with action, it begins with identity. You aren't where you want to be because you aren't the person who would be there. When people set big goals, they almost always focus on the wrong requirement. They focus on action. What habits do I need? What routines should I follow? How do I become more disciplined? But action is second order. The first order problem is identity. Who you are determines what feels natural. What feels natural determines what you do consistently. And what you do consistently determines your life. Most people try to build an extraordinary life on top of an identity that was never designed for it. It's like putting a luxury penthouse on a foundation that's already rotting. Let me make this concrete. Think of someone who's successful in a domain you admire. A bodybuilder with an incredible physique. A founder running a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Someone charismatic, calm, socially fluid. Do you think they experience their lifestyle the way you imagine they do? Do you think the bodybuilder is constantly grinding to eat well? Do you think the CEO has to fight themselves every morning to show up and lead? From the outside, it looks like discipline. From the inside, it feels like alignment. What looks like effort to you feels like identity to them. The bodybuilder doesn't struggle to eat healthy, they struggle when forced to eat poorly. The CEO doesn't force themselves to work, they feel restless when they're not building. And this is where most people get it wrong. They say, I'll live this way temporarily, and then once I reach the goal, I'll go back to enjoying life. That sentence alone guarantees failure. Because if the lifestyle that creates the result isn't enjoyable to you, you will abandon it the moment external pressure disappears. This shows up most clearly in fitness. Someone says, I can't wait until I'm done losing weight so I can enjoy life again. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If you don't adopt the lifestyle that led to the result as a permanent way of being, you didn't change. You just delayed regression. And time is the one resource you don't get refunded. Real change happens when your old habits become disgusting. Not because someone told you they're bad, but because you can see what they compound into. Most people tolerate their standards because they're not fully conscious of them. You don't hate your current life enough. and you don't desire the alternative clearly enough, so you drift, and drift feels comfortable until years pass. You say you want financial freedom, you say you want health, you say you want meaning, but your actions say something else. And that mismatch is not because you're lazy, it's because your current identity is still perfectly aligned with the life you're living right now. You aren't where you want to be because you don't actually want to be there. There's a quote from Alfred Adler that cuts through the noise. Trust only movement. Life happens at the level of events, not words. If you want to understand yourself, ignore what you say, watch what you do. Because all behavior is goal-directed. Every action you take is in service of something, even the ones you don't like, even the ones that sabotage you. And this is where things get uncomfortable, because most people think they procrastinate because they lack discipline, but procrastination is not a lack of motivation. It's motivation towards a different goal. When you avoid work, you might be protecting yourself from judgment. When you stay in a dead-end job, you might be protecting predictability. When you don't start the business, you might be protecting your identity as someone who had potential. Failure hurts, but exposure hurts more. So the mind does what it always does. It chooses safety. And then it rationalizes the choice in a way that preserves self-respect. I'm just not a risk taker. It's not the right time. I need to learn more first. Those aren't explanations, they're camouflage. Real change requires changing your goals, not surface-level goals like be more productive or work harder, but unconscious goals that are currently running your life. A goal isn't just something you want, a goal is a lens. It determines what you notice, what you ignore, what feels relevant, what feels threatening. If your unconscious goal is safety, you will interpret opportunity as danger. If your unconscious goal is approval, you will avoid paths that risk rejection. Until you bring those goals into awareness, your conscious intentions don't stand a chance. You aren't where you want to be because you're afraid to be there. At some point in your life, you accepted an idea about who you are. You may not remember when. You may not remember why, but once accepted, that idea gained power. And it didn't matter whether it was true, because belief shapes perception, and perception shapes behavior. This is how identity forms. First, you pursue a goal. Then you filter reality through it. You notice what helps you move forward. You act. You receive feedback. You repeat. The behavior becomes automatic. And eventually you say, I am the type of person who. Once that sentence forms, you defend it, not because it's accurate, but because consistency feels safe. And this process begins early. As a child, your primary goal was survival. You depended on others to tell you what was acceptable, so you conformed. And unless that conditioning is questioned, it calcifies. Then survival shifts from physical to psychological. You protect ideas, beliefs, worldviews, and when those are threatened, your nervous system reacts the same way it would to physical danger: fight, flight, freeze. That's why people argue online like their life depends on it. That's why challenges to identity feel personal. And that's why change feels terrifying. Because becoming someone new means letting someone old die. And most people would rather stay miserable than grieve an identity. The level of mind where the life you want actually exists. Human development happens in stages, not in a neat, linear way, but in recognizable patterns. Early on, you absorb beliefs to feel safe. Later, you conform to belong. Eventually, if you're lucky, you start noticing the mismatch between your inner life and the roles you play. Some people never go past that. Others begin to build principles, then question them, then see the systems behind them. And at higher levels, identity itself becomes flexible. Here's the key insight. Different lives require different levels of mind. You cannot think your way into a radically different life from the same level of consciousness that created your current one. Trying to do so creates friction, confusion, burnout, self-betrayal. Growth isn't about adding more habits, it's about outgrowing the mental structures that keep you small. And no matter where you are right now, movement through these stages follows a pattern: discomfort, uncertainty, reorganization, which brings us to intelligence. Intelligence is the ability to steer your life, to set a direction, to act, to observe feedback, to adjust. High intelligence isn't never failing, it's learning quickly. Low intelligence isn't making mistakes, it's repeating them. Most people don't fail because they lack resources, they fail because they can't iterate. They hit friction and interpret it as a sign they chose the wrong path. But progress doesn't feel smooth, it feels chaotic. And intelligent systems persist long enough to adapt. Your mind is a system. Your goals are its operating code. And most people are running programs they never consciously installed. Go to school, get the job, stay safe, don't rock the boat. It's a known path, and it doesn't work. To become more intelligent in this sense, you have to reject the default, enter uncertainty, set goals that expand your perception, and allow yourself to grow into someone new, which leads us to the turning point.